there wasn't much environment, and so we didn't have the Jabberwocky at all. You know, the monster. She would be swinging her sword at nothing. So it was a process to just keep on it. And as I'd put black banners in for the face, hoping that maybe I get it. It was just the process of building a scene that would work. And it was climactic, I remember, but with time you can get that done.
So you served as an editor and executive producer on Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland. And I remember when I was a kid, probably about, I would like to guess 9 or 10, I had seen the original Disney Alice in Wonderland so many times. Like, I know the lines like off with her head and who are you, like all that stuff. I've seen it so many times. So it was very refreshing to see, and I just finished watching it right now to see something different, but at the same time very properly done. And I'm
Mm.
not a fan of Disney live action remakes, but this was really, really well done, in terms of the performances and the visuals and editing and everything. So really enjoyed it.
Oh, yeah, thank you. No, it was made in what, 2011?
10.
Oh,
Yeah.
2010. Wow, so
Yeah.
14 years ago. And I had a chance before this to breeze back through it, and I had forgotten how beautiful it was and how the story really resonated and held together.
It sure did. And I think if Tim Burton didn't hadn't directed it, I mean the visual, how we all know Tim Burton, you see a frame, that's Tim Burton's film. Like you could just tell, right? And if somebody else had done it, not to take away from anyone, it probably wouldn't have been that seamless in terms of visual effects and stories and everything. So, you served as an editor, but having worked with Tim Burton so often, how did the EP role kind of came into play? Was it just a very organic thing?
Um, yes, it started, I think, on the movie prior to that. I don't even remember what one that was. You might know, but I served as an editor, but I dealt with the studio an enormous amount. And Richard Zanuck wasn't with us. I think that was his first movie as a producer. And the marketing people I think it was Paramount, said, Chris, you do the job of a producer here. Have you ever thought about that role? And I thought, well, not really. I kind of like to stay undercover and be an editor. But she encouraged me, and others did. And I went to Tim and asked him about it, and he said, "No, that'd be a good idea." So that's I guess there's nothing more organic than that, really. Um, so I was lucky to be on a movie of that stature, and I think that's his highest grossing movie, um, to be that with that title.
Yeah, I was actually quite surprised, but wasn't surprised when I saw the box office numbers just like 20 minutes ago. One over $1 billion. And, obviously Alice in Wonderland is such like a big name that's been around for so long. But nevertheless, for people to, I don't think that movie would make that much money now if it was to release today. I just don't think people have that appetite, regardless of who does it. But it was done really, really well, and people really, I think the visuals really got to people because it was something new and fresh, with the motion capture technology, which was in the early stages, in those times.
No, I think you're absolutely right. These days it might be different, but it seemed to be ahead of its time with the visual transitions and the visual effects and the beautiful design and the photography, and the characters were spot on with their voices. Um, and the transitions were gorgeous, and the message was nice, for
Yes,
kids.
yes, 100%. Would it be fair to say, and please forgive my ignorance, is Alice, when you worked as the editor on Alice in Wonderland, would it be fair to say it was one of the first times you had done a film where it was completely, with the exception of the opening and the ending scenes, green screen, like to that extent?
I'd have to say yes. Um, I haven't looked at my bio lately, but I'd say for sure. I mean, there were only two scenes, the beginning and the end, that were actually they were shot in England and were
Right.
normal photography. The whole rest of it were men in suits or little creatures in green or nobody there that actors were acting to. And it was quite a process. And we had a brilliant visual effects supervisor in Ken Ralston. I remember Richard Zanuck said he basically invented visual effects with John Dykstra, and he was terrific.
Yeah. And how challenging was it? Should I use a different word? What was the process like editing something like that, as well as being an EP on the film? And were you physically present on the set for that, for all the production, or most of it at least?
Well, good question. I'm with Tim. With Tim, I'm always with him,
Okay.
right near the set. Primarily, his movies are done on the set. His best ones are done, are set movies. And he calls me to the set. He comes in the cutting room during the day. He's very involved in the cut, and he learns from the cut. Other directors don't want to look at the cut, a lot of them, until they're done shooting. But for him, it's a learning process. He comes from animation, so he's very particular and specific about what he gets. He's not a commercial director who I've worked with a lot of who they just cover everything. And that's great later, but it's not precise work so much. It finds its footing in the cutting room and in post-production. Whereas Tim comes in during the day, like I say, I get the video tap, we call it, which
Mhm.
comes out of the cameras on set right into the cutting room during the day. So I won't even have all the footage of a scene and I start editing it. And, I'll put black banners in for uh, uh, close up missing or, moments that I would like. And Tim comes in and he goes, yeah, that's a good idea. Or sometimes, "No, I don't think we need it." But it's that kind of a process during shooting with all of his movies. And so it's been great for both of us. And he actually, probably about a third of the way in, or maybe half the way through production, every Friday I make a version for him. He sees the movie as it is, and it gives him ideas about the characters, the emotional content, if he's being true to the narrative, and really helps him continue. And he gives me a couple of notes too, which are great. So the nice thing about that collaboration is in some cases when directors see their first cut, the assembly, they want to retire and get out of the business because it's either long or unfocused or most scripts are overwritten. But in the case of Tim, at the end of shooting, when I show him the whole movie, he's basically seen it. So there's no there's no agenda. We just go to work and do what we have to do.
That's incredible. And it's so true what you said about seeing a cut and trying to, sort of say goodbye to it. I remember the very first film that I directed. I'm in the doc narrative world, and
Great.
now sort of shifting into narrative. But I remember the very first doc that I did. Um, it's all seems fine and dandy, like when you're working on it, but when you sit down in the post-production and like, oh crap, you're right. And then that's where the path of should I continue doing this or should I, move on? But it's a daunting thing for sure. Like, you just don't you think you're just getting shots, but the story thing makes a huge, that's what's it all about. It's all about the story at the end of the day, and that's it.
Yeah. And, it is difficult showing a first cut. Uh, it's just always, especially with commercial directors, because I mean, Armageddon, I think, was 3.5 hours first cut, maybe Pearl Harbor the same, with Michael Bay. And then it's a matter of whittling it down and focusing. It's a lot more work. Whereas Tim's a very because of his animation background.
Mm,
He shoots a lot of takes for performance, but it's not a lot of angles. It's sometimes he only shoots one camera. A lot of his DPs don't like to shoot two cameras because they're not lit for it. They light it for one angle. But the last few he's had two cameras. His director of photography has have encouraged it. But it's a good way to go. In the case of Alice, um, so much was being evolved after the cut, in terms of visual effects and um, creating these characters that weren't there, adding the voices. We basically had off-screen voices for
yeah,
Johnny when he's, the Mad Hatter sitting at that table with all of the animated characters. We didn't have we didn't have the real actors there off screen reading him lines. So he was great that way. I mean, they're all so well trained. Helena was terrific, and Crispin Glover was interesting, and all the live actors in the movie in the beginning and the end were classic British theater trained actors. And since then, it's been a long time. I've seen them in a lot of really special projects. So it was an honor to be working with them.
that's amazing. And of course, the great Alan Rickman, even though he had a very small part, but it was nice to hear his voice. Uh, he was just one of a kind that certainly is missed. I mean, I know like growing up with Die Hard and you know the most classic antagonist there ever has been, in my opinion.
Oh yeah. No, it's the Blue Caterpillar. He was
Yeah.
spot on. He was spot on. And we actually did I think it was what was it, Sweeney Todd with him. Um,
Yes.
and he and actually Tim Spall, who's also a voice, as Bayard and Alice were both in that movie, how many years later, as real characters. So he's so watchable in anything he does. And he loved the movie. The preview in New York, the premiere in New York, he was very, very nice to me. And I was honored by his presence.
Right. Just kind of jumping back in time, Chris, and I hope you don't mind. What was the catalyst in you becoming who you are today? How did the journey start in general in the film industry as well as with Tim Burton?
I was one of those guys that all my roommates wanted to be lawyers in college, and I had no interest in that. I
Mm,
came from a more artistic background, I'd have to say. Um, I would draw a lot as a kid, more internal things. Um, and so I left school after 2 years, university, and went to an art school in East Bay, California College of Arts and Crafts. And
mm,
while I was there, I made a couple little films and enjoyed it. And my oldest brother, knew the guys that made Woodstock. They're much older than me, and they were going to make another movie on the American Revolution for the bicentennial. We're talking 1976.
mm,
So I was a kid. I left school, drove down to LA. They let me stay at their house, the director, Michael Wadley. And there was an editing machine there that they did Woodstock on in the garage. So I played with it a lot and could thread it up. And, I gravitated a bit toward it because it was very much like drawing. I mean, it was an internal, back then, editing was very much you in the film.
yeah,
Now it's you and 8 studio executives and 3 producers and a director and writers and previews, and it's a whole nother ball game. But
right.
back when I started, I I enjoyed it, and I became an apprentice on something after being a PA, and just kind of worked my way up and got lucky really because during those times you could you could make a movie. They were called independent films. There was no studio involvement. It was financed by individuals who wanted to see their name on a movie screen, basically, um, and could deduct it from taxes back then. So I did like three or four of those editing before I ever assisted or even handled film. You know, I was cutting my hands on the film because it would move fast through those moviolas. And so I just kept at it and ended up on Weird Science, which is one of my first feature films for a studio. It was what was it? Universal,
Mm.
and then I did Top Gun from there. Moved over to Paramount, had an association with Tony Scott. He kept me very busy, and my co-editor who hired me to do Top Gun, Billy Weber, brought me on to Midnight Run, who he had made the first Beverly Hills Cop with Marty Brest. So, you know, that's how the business works. I kept working, and um, Tim Burton needed a editor for Batman Returns. So I went in to meet him, and he went to art school too, in at Cal Arts, which was that same version, but down in Southern California. I was in Northern California, and we connected pretty quickly. And I loved all the toys on his wall, and we he hired me pretty much. And from then on, I was fortunate enough that I did every one until, you know, for I think there's been 14 movies, including the animated ones, which we did Nightmare Before Christmas during Batman Returns. And just because I was there, you know, it's a long process in animated film. Henry Selick would come down, we'd show three shots or something. You know, they take forever as it was stop motion on the chem, and he ended up asking me to help him continue with it when Batman Returns was finished. So that was fun. It was my first animated film with him. Then there was Corpse Bride and Frankenweenie after that down the road.
Right. No, that's fantastic. Did you, before I go on something else, did you do Ed Wood as well?
Yes,
For me, I think, I mean, Tim Burton has done some amazing stuff, right? Like I can go watch every movie of his, but Ed Wood holds a special place. I don't know why, because maybe it's because I'm a filmmaker and that's what I do, and you could relate to that to some extent. But it's one of the his best works. I truly enjoyed Ed Wood. I mean, everything else too, and especially with Batman Returns. When you said Batman Returns, I remember watching the trailer and watching the film, and I said to myself, and this was before I realized, I think Batman Returns came out in 1991, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
that's right.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
so I realized that I want to go in that, journey of being a director in 93 when Jurassic Park came out, but I appreciated the editing sequence of Catwoman when she does that whole flip, when she and then she goes meow, and then the gas station, I think it was, that explodes in the background.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
I thought that, I mean, I still remember that. Like that's how much impact that quick, set of edits had on in my conscious, and that just kind of went on to do, what I do now. So yeah, hats off to you for that. It was
Oh,
amazing.
that's nice. No, that it was fun, the movie. It was a big movie for me. I hadn't done the sets were beyond
Oh God,
belief.
yeah.
And Danny's music, he'd come in and ask me to lengthen a shot or two, and I thought, why is the composer asking me to do that? And what it was for his theme when the light goes on in the sky for the big Batman theme.
Yeah.
And I said, sure, Danny, you know, he's Danny Elfman. I thought he has a long association with Tim, and he's such a nice guy. So I did it, and he said, okay, can you make it even a little longer? And I thought, wow, I'd never sit on the shot like this forever, you know, up in the twirls the light, everything's happening. Michael Keaton looks up and it flashes in the sky, three or four cuts, endless. And then that theme hit it so hard, it was brilliant. But
Yeah, I
it
can.
was a great collaboration and tough. We worked every day to hit a release date. And actually, the studio was very uncertain about the movie in terms of, you know, it was a different era. But they didn't want anybody being on fire, no fire with people. And if you remember, there was a guy running through Gotham
Mhm.
City on fire. And it's funny because the objection with the MPA, I think back then was when Catwoman put the stuffed animal in the garbage disposal, and you can't do that. That apparently that offends in their minds that would offend too many moviegoers. So I think we got away with that one. We appealed, and you would never these days think that that would be at all an issue. But like I say, it was another era, and Batman was meant, for a PG audience,
Yeah.
maybe G. The first one I'm sure was PG, but it was special. And and Ed Wood, it's funny you mention it because I've had directors call me and say, because of that movie, I want to hire you. And I thought, well, it wasn't very hard to edit. I mean, it really wasn't. If you look at it, it was about taking scenes out. There was a
Yeah.
lot of stuff between Bella and Ed, Martin Landau and Ed, that I convinced him to take out. He was very gracious about it, uh, because there's more there, but it just seemed it didn't really add much for me. But the movie was in black and white. It was he we did it in New York. He wanted to leave LA. We went out there. I missed the giant earthquake here because of that, the Northridge quake, which was great, but it was a very cold winter. And we mixed the movie up at Berkeley at Fantasy Films, which isn't there anymore. So he was moving around a lot, to kind of maybe even duck around the studio to do post production. And it was hard for them to reconcile that movie with their tastes. It didn't, they were confused at a preview when they saw it with an audience. But, you were right. In hindsight, it was a terrific film and people really loved it.
Yeah, I mean, to know that there was a guy who made Plan 9 from Outer Space, and then I actually ended up watching Plan 9 from Outer Space, with the saucers hanging off a string. Uh,
Right.
I mean, that just kind of goes to show like the dedication of the guy, like he just wanted to make a film as crappy or terrible as it is, but he ended up making it anyways. And that's what Edward was about. It's about perseverance and believing in self and who you are, and no matter what anybody else thinks.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Going back to Alice in Wonderland, Chris, had you seen the original animated version before you took a dive on that on the actual live action one?
I saw it way back when I was a kid,
Hmm.
um, 6 or 7 or something, but I didn't revisit it. I actually had to overlap I was finishing up another movie, so I missed like the first week or two, so I had no prep time to get myself involved in it, which was fine because we shot it right here in Culver City, which is now the Amazon Studios, but it was a legendary Culver Studios. I think, Casablanca, no, Gone with the Wind was shot there.
Okay.
But I didn't apply any knowledge from the original. And to be honest, when I did Dumbo, I barely saw the first Dumbo. I didn't want to color my view of the movie with
Yeah.
original.
Yeah, no, good thinking. Good thinking because you don't see that in any of the Alice in Wonderland, at least the live action one. So, um,
Yeah,
but yeah.
no, no, I know. I mean, I mean, I read the script, I follow it, but I don't hold it as a Bible at all because the audience doesn't read the script when they walk into a movie theater. So I try and be as objective as I can with the material.
Right. In Alice in Wonderland, like I was watching some behind the scenes stuff, right? Like for example, how certain scenes were done, with the green screen and everything. But nevertheless, like I'm just trying to wrap my head around, and I mean, I can envision it, but at the same time, would like for you to sort of talk about it. When you are editing Alice in Wonderland, and like we spoke earlier that how it was very different, with all the green screen and everything. How, as an editor, challenging, if at all it was, like, trying to work with scenes that didn't have anything else around them. And the like, especially the finale where Alice fights the dragon. I mean, she's just kind of in thin air, just moving around with the sword, right? Like, how do you kind of overcome that? Because at least in the live action, full live action, you have all these reaction shots and these emotions that you can sort of, observe and implement your editing based on that. Was that any more challenging for you to do that, or was it a piece of cake and walk in
It
the park
it
for you?
it is. I mean, I don't remember the exact sequence of shots I got, but in a scene like that, I had probably the reaction shots and what Johnny and the White Queen and maybe even Helen were doing before Alice actually went up those steps. And it was
Mm-hmm.
just steps, by the way. There was nothing, most of those sets were not sets. They were just um, whatever the actor needed to walk on.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some spooky trees maybe here and there, or but there wasn't much environment. And so we didn't have the Jabberwocky at all, the monster. She would be swinging her sword at nothing. So it was a process to just keep on it. And as I'd put black banners in for the face, hoping that maybe I get it. It was just the process of building a scene that would work. And it was climactic, I remember, but with time you can get that done, and visual effects post, the visualization,
Mm-hmm.
which they do now. They do pre and post on that. I don't think I had much pre-visualization, which is, it's kind of a cartoon of what it's supposed to be. But now it's very sophisticated. We pre-visualize almost a whole movie, and then most directors, Tim doesn't even follow it. It's a guide, really. Some directors follow it to a fault in a way, but it was challenging. But with the beauty of that is I have time because things aren't coming. It's not getting a massive film and say, okay, I have to make the scene out of this, and then another 2 hours of films coming in tomorrow. So that's a luxury in a way on these big visual effects movies, especially back then. We had a lot of time to make that movie, and we had to work every day. I think from January 2nd, I might have worked New Year's Day until the release because we had to hit a release date. But it worked. It all came together.
How big is your team, post-production team? Like, how many people do you work with, and what process do you have in working with them, whether it was Alice in Wonderland or any other project?
It's really not that. I have an assistant and a first assistant and a second assistant and an apprentice. Um, and that's all really. And what happens is the visual effects teams are bigger. Now there's visual effects editors on movies, and they have
Yeah.
a whole, they have twice the size of the editing team because they have meetings with different vendors around the world now, in all the countries. So they're always trying to navigate, and visual effects takes a while. But we get various stages of a shot in at different times and plug them in, and it's a give or take, and we need handles. Tim and I generally leave things long because you can't ask for more later. They cost so much
Yeah.
these shots. So we leave it long, and some people think, why are you doing that? But we cut it when we have it all in 3 days. We can trim a movie down, but we don't want to be caught without having enough of a shot. And that's it's challenging, and that's the world now. There's so many of these. I'm on one right now. There's so many of these movies that are dependent on not just the footage and yourself, but visual effects people around the world. And we're always having meetings and commenting on what can be better and how the dimensionality of the shots look and the characters and how far away they are from each other and the backgrounds. And Tim on every movie I've worked on with him, when he can, he's changed the sky. He's a big, he's very big
Oh
into
yeah.
how's the sky supposed to look? Because pretty much there's blue screen up there when you're shooting on a set. You can make a sky. And so we pick different, his movies are very obviously moody. So he has and it was very evident in Alice as well. Um, the skies that we could make.
Right. I'm glad you talked about handles. I find something I learned on a feature that my second feature, which I co-edited, but just kind of helped out here and there. And when we sent it for grading, which is, not visual effects, but still you have to get it graded. I realized that how after we did so many screenings everywhere, in Europe and North America, that you see something and then you have to do the whole thing, create and extend the shot, send it to the colorist. It's better just to do, at least 15 to 20 seconds of extra handles and just keep it with you in case things come up. But in visual effects, it's a completely different thing because it's way more intensified than, color grading.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, we're lucky to get a foot, 16 frames. Sometimes we ask for a second. And at a certain point in the movie, when budget becomes an issue and the cut's kind of finding itself, oftentimes they'll come to me and say, "Do you really need any handle, on certain shots?" And certain ones I'm confident we won't need. So, it's always it's more there's just more going on these movies in post-production and working with the teams of the visual effects people. So
Yeah.
it's the editing crew I use isn't very big. I
Yeah.
mean, I have with Tim, I have my own visual effects editor who kind of works with me um, and handles the visual effects material. It's not the visual effects producer, but and Alice, Ken had his whole team, Ken Ralston, and our editor, I don't even remember who that was, because I think we were handling a lot of it in the movie. I mean, when we meet him and he's around that table with all those
Mm.
with all those characters, when we meet the Mad Hatter, we didn't have anything. It was just him, and we had voices, and it came alive later. Ultimately, you just cut to somebody in green, and those were small characters. There was a mouse, there was um, uh,
Mr. Rabbit.
yeah, exactly, and Bayard, I think the dog, he was
Yes.
green, and of course Crispin Glover, he was always green. He wasn't even dressed. Helena was in her costume, and Johnny, of course. I mean, even when he stormed across the table, nobody was there. Just a lot of teapots and things that he could knock over as he stormed to the end of the other table. But he's such a veteran. I mean, it was so easy to pick the takes and work with his material.
Yeah, 100%. Earlier, Chris, you mentioned Beverly Hills Cops and working with Tony Scott. My wife and I just literally 2 weeks ago, we saw Beverly Hills Cop. I saw it after a long time, like probably, good 30 years or so. And you know, it was such a great film because it was simple and there
Mm.
was not a lot of, characters, extra stories, floating around. And I find, and you can probably tell me if I'm right or wrong, movies nowadays are not the way they used to be, in my opinion. There are some
Mm.
good ones here and there. Is it because the stories have become more visual effects dependent slash also, like you said earlier, there's like five producers, studio executives, all these people involved, as opposed to, in the 80s or even 90s or 70s, that probably wasn't the case as much. Is that fair to assess?
Yeah, no, it was much more. Well, I was fortunate because Tim has always had Final Cut because of his success, and Tony Scott had that. And Jerry Bruckheimer, who I've worked with a lot, I think I've done 12 movies with him. as a producer, he was the studio. So he kind of kept them away, and he was a great asset with his creative comments, but he would leave us alone. That's the mark of a talented. He'd hire all the right people he thought were good for the job, and his comments were brilliant. And then we wouldn't even show the studio. We'd show the studio when we showed an audience. They call it a preview,
Hmm.
a test screening, and so that's when it shakes out. But they weren't as involved, Disney, when we did. He had his deal over there, or even Paramount. But now they're not as high, they're not hired as much Final Cut directors. The studio likes to, and they're smart people. They're trained in story and their craft, but they're looking at the bottom line. What's going to make money,
Yep.
and how can we keep the shareholders happy? And keeping their jobs is important, as it is with all of us. But I don't know how long their deals are, but sometimes they're only 2 or 3 years. So it's not like you're going to be there a long time if you don't perform. So there's a certain nervousness on every movie now, especially the higher the budget, the more anxiety I want to say there is. And so that's why you're seeing a predominance of sequels. There's nothing that new. When we were making movies in the 80s, there weren't very many sequels. Beverly Hills Cop might have been the first. I mean, I don't know what the first movie was that had a sequel. There's, I guess, maybe Lethal Weapon or something. I'm
Yeah.
not sure
Yeah.
back then, but now with intellectual property so important, it's not even sequels, they're remakes of movies that
Hmm.
were done maybe twice before. So it's still fun, and it's still a movie, and we're lucky to be doing this, but there is more opinions to recognize, and more viewpoints to take into consideration. And there are more previews now in terms of audience test screenings, three, four, five sometimes, previews in different parts of the country, just for security's sake. It's also for marketing. The people that sell movies now are so important with the internet, and they feel responsible for the box office of a movie as much as the filmmakers. So it's a whole art form, that what trailers are made, and they test those trailers now to a great degree, and you see them on every uh, social media site. So it's just expanded the entertainment business of movies that way.
Right. And I feel it's a cycle of anything else in life, right? Like I think because of all this that's going on, which is great in some cases, in my humble opinion, I feel that what happened in the 90s uh, with the, independent films becoming more and more prominent, especially Miramax starting it, and then
Right.
DreamWorks had a big. I feel that there is that void right now, which only one company is doing, A24. They tell stories that are much on a smaller scale or more humanistic, and I feel audience is craving for it. But I've not, I
Yeah.
don't think anybody is having that courage to take a chance and to do something like that more often than, than they do now. So it'd be interesting to see it because I grew up all that stuff, right? Like even the big budget movies like Beverly Hills Cop, if you want to call it, Top Gun, Crimson Tide, they were just so centric on characters and story than anything else.
Yeah. No, no, you're right. We do miss those. We do miss the kind of lower budget, but more spontaneous, and they take more chances because they can afford to. But I think that'll come back. I mean, you
I
do
think
see it. You do see it now. It's just whether you're going to get a feature release, because it costs so much to market a movie. And with the streaming services, they can show anything. They can make whatever they want, and show. They don't have to try hit a home run every time. So you'll see kind of smaller. And a
Yeah.
lot of documentaries, you see that now, which are great. I love seeing those on all the streaming services. It seems that we've never seen so many in my mind.
Yeah, no, documentary scene has exploded in the last 5, 6 years. When I started directing my second and third feature documentaries, between the start time in 2018 until they were like released, 2022, the amount of documentaries went like the numbers went through the roof. Like now there's everybody that's involved in it, like Disney, Amazon, Netflix, 20th Century, like everybody, Fox Searchlight, everybody's doing it, which is
No,
good. It.
no, it is. I mean, you see, like, I think Frank Marshall even produces, you see like big time produced Brian Grazer and Ron Howard are
Yep,
making document. So it's really nice. It's really wonderful to see.
it
So
is.
the content, there's a good side to everything now. It's just that the big feature films are there's a great deal of pressure to make them work, and they cost more than ever. So it's that you feel that pressure as an editor, or probably anybody on the set, but certainly in post-production, because that's where it all falls, and that's where we start to show it to audiences and almost we never used to do reshoots in movies. We very rarely had to go back. Um, I don't think we did. I think we did one thing on Top Gun. We made Tom Cruise more likable because in the early screenings he seemed to what Iceman said he was. He was too arrogant, and he delivered us a great moment that helped his character. But other than that, now we didn't really do reshoots, and now every movie does them. They're almost built into schedules. Marvel kind of they do too. I think a couple of them. They and that's a good thing, but it shows that you just get started with the movie, see where it takes you. You have the money, the pressure's on. You have to deliver a really high quality product that everybody loves. So it's a community effort, and sometimes just a singular vision is really would reveal a better product. As evidenced by Oppenheimer. I mean, Chris Nolan, I mean, I think controlled that whole thing. So I don't think you would have seen that movie coming out of a studio with a lot of voices. I mean, I can't be sure, but that's just the world we live in now.
Yeah. I also find, I mean, this is just from my personal experience, limited resources sometimes, if not most of the time, is a really good thing because I remember my first introduction to editing was VCR to VCR. Like that's how I used to edit. Just for fun, not for money or anything. And then when I took some film courses and I learned on flatbed editing, like, just cutting, splicing, taping, and everything. And then when I switched to Final Cut Pro, my professor told me this, that my editing skills were way ahead of a lot of other students. And I wonder it's because of that experience of limited resources, because you have something else small to do and you're just cutting and splicing as opposed to digital, you can just do so much and then it comes, with the flow.
Yeah, I think there's no question. I mean, in it's the less you have, the more your brain works to make it work. Whereas if you rely on potential other elements, it may not come about. But yeah, no, I get that for sure.
Just kind of going back to Alice in Wonderland just as we wrap up, the film you worked on as an executive producer, you edited it, it's finished, you do a bunch of test screenings and it comes out. And, according to Rotten Tomatoes, it was like 55% audience score, 52% critic score, which doesn't really matter at the end of the day. And the film just went out to do the business that it did. Were you guys surprised? Or was, like just that the way it blew up?
Um, yeah, especially because to be honest, we didn't have one audience screening on that movie. Um, we had terrific producers in Richard Zanuck and Joe Roth. I mean, they both had run studios. And that was a time at Disney when Robert Iger was taking over, I think, and Dick Cook was
Mm,
stepping aside right during the shooting. So they were in a state of flux, but they left us alone. And the movie was never in a shape to to show an audience with all the visual effects that were outstanding and uh, blue screen everywhere and characters in green suits with voices. So we never had to do that on Alice. But yeah, it was, I mean, I wasn't even aware that it was doing that kind of business. You know, I just moved on to my next project, and next thing you know, it was, you know, it's really comforting to know that it's being embraced in a financial sense. And I'm sure for Tim that was welcome news, although he has such a, you know, pretty stellar track record with his box office. But you know, he sought out something like Ed Wood. You're never going to really make money on that movie, or
yeah.
even Sweeney Todd. I mean, it's an R-rated musical. It was a tough sell. It took three studios to pitch in
Yeah.
to even finance it, but it was a pleasant surprise.
That's really good to hear. Were you involved in the upcoming Beetlejuice at all?
No, I was busy, and it was done at a lower level. It was a very complicated story, but I did was asked to go view it at a preview in Burbank, and I gave Tim some notes of what I thought, and saw him a couple of times since, and you know I wish him the best of luck on it. I think it comes out very soon.
Yeah, September 5th or something like that, I think.
Yeah,
Um, with without talking about it, what would you, from what you saw, did you like it? Just a simple yes or no.
yes. No, I mean it was interesting to me to have not worked on it because it was the first time I hadn't on one of his features. And then just to go into a theater and see that, it was a lot of fun. Um,
That's good.
yeah, no, he creates such a great world, and you know he's so original. And people who try and do his kind of movies, somehow it never works. I mean, I think was there a sequel to Alice in Wonderland? I think there might
Yeah,
have.
there was, and I actually looked it up right before after I finished it. It came out in 2016, and it probably did like 300 million worldwide.
Uh-huh.
And the reviews were even more harsh on that.
Right.
I haven't seen anything of it, so I don't know. But you're right. I mean, it's just because
It's
there's only one Michael Bay. There can only be one Michael Bay. You know, there can only be one Tim Burton. And I find there's a what happens, and I see that in you know around people that I know as well, is that when you start not identifying your own voice, you know, like your own style, your own approach, you zigzag and try to find different people's approaches. It's fine to get influence here and there, but then you lose who you are, and then that doesn't come out in a natural way on the screen.
yeah. No, it's true. I mean, it's true. It's hard. And he is original, and he always has been, and he always will be. So you know, it's been a pleasure working with him for all these years, as well as everybody else. I've been so fortunate, and you know, I'm continuing at it. I'm blessed to be called to continue working. I'm thrilled to be doing this.
That's amazing. Listen, Chris, on that note, it's been a fantastic talk, you know, time talking to you. I really appreciate your insight, your openness. And if you're up for it, I would love to chat with you as many times as possible on all the films that you worked on and in future that you're working on because it's been truly a delight. And I've learned so much from watching the work that you have done. Like on a small note, you have no idea how many times I see Crimson Tide, the last scene, you know, when Denzel Washington goes through the steps, down on the steps, and they have this
Okay.
conversation about the horses and you know
Yes.
and all that and the music with it and everything. It's incredible. Obviously it's a collaborative effort, but I know having edited features myself, it's not easy, but at the same time, it's fun, which is what makes it work.
Yeah, well, thank you. No, it's been a pleasure, this talk, and I really appreciate it. And anytime you want to talk about anything, I'm available. Or if you're ever out here, we could go out and have a lunch or whatever you're willing or whatever you have time to do. It'd be great to connect.
I would love to. That'd be my honor, and thank you so much for the invitation. I'm looking forward to chatting much more.
Okay, thank you again.